Hi, my name is Toni. Yesterday, I did what I'll call part one of this book that I found called Love Me Do, The Beatles' Progress by Michael Braun. I believe it was the very first book written about the Beatles between the years 1963 and 1964. Yesterday I read the preface. Go look for part one. This is part two. I'm going to try and read most of the book, excluding some of the boring parts. This is the introduction. Introduction. For as long as anyone can remember, the weather has been the main topic of conversation in Britain. But last year it had some very unexpected competition. Just as the Profumo-Keeler-Ward balloon was fizzling out, by the way, I looked that up and it was some kind of a political scandal, everyone became aware of four young men from Liverpool. At first, people just stared at their haircuts, and a few even listened to their music. Then gradually, as autumn turned to winter, all that could be heard from John O'Groats in the north to Land's End in the south was Beatles, Beatles, Beatles. The island that had bravely withstood invasion from the outside for nearly 1,000 years had been conquered from within. By the way, let me throw in a note in between paragraphs. Don't forget, I'm reading to you from a book that is over 60 years old. So some of the information is outdated, okay? Okay. Paragraph. Britain's teenagers had been the first to realize that the Beatles weren't bugs. Their first record, Love Me Do, had entered the national pop charts, and their second, Please Please Me, had become number one. Please, please me, oh yeah, like I please you. There you go. They made frequent appearances on several television shows, which are devoted entirely to playing pop music and which command huge audiences. They were also heavily featured in the newspapers that report on pop music and conduct the pop charts and are read largely by teenagers. One of the papers, the New Musical Express, claims to have a larger readership than any other musical newspaper in the world. While those old enough to vote still hadn't heard of the Beatles, 12,000 lined up all night for tickets to a concert. And 20,000 mobbed them at London Airport, delaying the departure of the Queen and the Prime Minister. Then, in October, the government went through a week of crisis following the resignation of Harold Macmillan. As rumors and politicians swirled through London, the Beatles were besieged by a mob of the faithful while they rehearsed at the Palladium. Reports differ as to the size of the crowd, but the story provided a respite from the weightier affairs of the state, and during the next few days, Britain's adults became aware that Beatles was not a misprint. Beatles. As a result of the publicity over the storming of the Palladium, the Beatles were invited to appear at the Royal Variety performance. Boy, just imagine how their parents felt about that, huh? The program starred Marlene Dietrich and most of Britain's top entertainers. On the day of the show, the Prince of Wales Theatre in Piccadilly was blockaded by a horde of teenage girls screaming for the Beatles. Miss Dietrich had trouble entering the stage door. And when the Queen Mother, accompanied by Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon, arrived, they were greeted by shouts of, "We want the Beatles!" On stage, the Beatles sang several songs to a respectful, though undemonstrative adult audience. Before the last number, one of the group, John Lennon, stepped in the front of the stage and said, "On this next number," he said, "I want you all to join in. Would those in the cheap seats clap their hands? The rest of you can rattle your jewelry." Afterwards, in the Royal Lounge, the Beatles were presented to the Queen Mother. She told them she had enjoyed the show and asked them where they would be performing next. At Slough, they told her. That's a town or a city. "Ah," she said with obvious delight, "that's near us." Beatlemania had received the royal imprimatur. From then on, there was no restraining the press. For the past several years, Britain's national newspapers have been engaged in a fierce struggle to attract the younger generation of readers. The popular papers reprint the pop music charts and patriotically bemoan the fact that the top-selling records have always been made by Americans or singers such as Cliff Richards, Billy Fury, and they have studied Elvis, Avalon, and Enka, mastering American accents and presentations. At first, the Beatles also sounded American. There was something of the Everly Brothers instrumentation, plus the style and presentation of the Miracles and Little Richard. But this time, the beat wasn't coming from Nashville or Harlem. As one 14-year-old girl told The Observer, "You usually think of pop singers, and so forth, living in glamorous places, Hollywood and so on. But the Beatles aren't like that. It's Liverpool, where Z cars come from." In short, 4 local lads with funny but acceptable haircuts who sang funky but were clean, adorable, and cheeky, but not too cheeky, just perfect for British idols. The press took a brief look. I'm not going to read this part. Let's see. I'm going to move past this. Okay, they called it the Mersey Sound. In case you don't know, the Mersey River runs through Liverpool. Since most people in Britain read at least one of the many daily Sunday newspapers that circulate from one end of the country to another, within a week everyone was talking about the Beatles. The popular papers vied with one another to run versions of headlines incorporating the words Beatles or yeah, yeah, yeah. As an American living in England, I was curious to find out what was happening in this country. I had always thought of it as in terms of sonnets and thatched roofs. I was helped somewhat by the papers. On the one hand, the Daily Mirror, which has the biggest circulation in the world, said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to be a real sour square not to love that nutty, noisy, happy, handsome Beatles. If they don't sweep your blues away, brother, you're a lost cause. If they don't put a beat in your feet, sister, you're not living." How refreshing to see these rumbustious young Beatles take a middle-aged royal variety performance by the scruff of their necks and have them beetling like teenagers. I love using the word beetle as a verb. Write that down, dog. The fact is that the Beatle people are everywhere, from Wapping to Windsor, aged 7 to 70, and it's plain to see why these 4 energetic, cheeky lads from Liverpool go down so big. They're young, new, they're high-spirited, cheerful. What a change from the self-pitying moaners crooning their lovelorn tunes from the tortured shallows of lukewarm hearts. The Beatles are wacky. They wear their hair like a mop, but it's washed. It's super clean. So is their fresh young act. They don't have to rely on off-colored jokes. Youngsters like the Beatles and Cliff Richards and the Shadows are doing a good turn for show business and the rest of us, with their new sounds and new looks. Good luck, Beatles. And that bit I read you there, the last part, was again from the Daily Mirror. So that was part 2 of this book called Love Me Do by Michael Braun. And like I said, I believe that it was the very first book written about the Beatles, because that is really early, 63 to 64. What I'm going to try and do is read a little of this book to you every day. I'll leave out a paragraph or some sentences here and there that I think are kind of unnecessary or just really ridiculous, out of date. I thought it would be fun to go way back because, I forgot to tell you, this book is the book that John Lennon said was his favorite book on the Beatles. Yes, in a 1970 interview with Rolling Stone Magazine, John Lennon said Love Me Do was his favorite book of the Beatles. It reminded him of what they were really like. So, I have a new channel here, and I thought it would be really great to start with a book that John Lennon himself gave the thumbs up to. Don't you think that's a good idea? I'm trying to grow my channel. I hope you'll stay with me. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. Tell a friend if they like show business. This bit is going to be about the Beatles. Tomorrow I'll do part 3. Then I'll keep reading. But I'm also going to be having other things up here because I live near London, and my husband and I live near a lot of stars or houses that used to belong to stars. You might want to see, like big mansions that might have belonged to whoever, you know what I mean? And then also relive like real close to some music studios that were used by Zeppelin, Queen, Ozzy, and all kinds of bands. So I want to, do all my research. We're going to go by there. We're going to take videos of the actual places. If you want to stick with us, I want to share what we see with you. Okay? But I can't always go out and do that because I take care of my mother-in-law who has Alzheimer's. Okay? Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you tomorrow with part 3 of The Beatles' Love Me Do by Michael Braun. Have a wonderful evening.